Yes. All right. Okay, and I will send you the names and just two names. One. For example, Janila. Good morning. That's this is and again, the names is Hilary Manila and Alexander. Is that yes, Alexander. Is a permanent secretary. Professional. Hilary Manila. Liba. Okay, so no. From the National Academy. And then this is a pure paper, so this is a principle paper, so you want to set up system. Yes, she's not, she's on, she will be delivering something very important. You will be at around
After just after
2 seconds. No, we're gonna have, first,
pre-recording.
first, yeah, and then, yes, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna just present, I'm not gonna participate. Pablo Santos. What is that? Uh,
Доброго ранку, шановні.
So, good morning, dear colleagues. Good morning. We are about to start our work finally, and my name is Pavlo Zamostyan. I'm the deputy representative of the UNFPA in Ukraine, but I'm a facilitator today, and I will take actually. I will take this responsibility for a couple of hours, and sometimes I will ask you a question, which I do consider to be interesting for the audience. So today we work in a hybrid format. Therefore, the vast majority of our audience, I do hope everybody's joining us online, as it usually happens these days. So, quite an accepted already a format of communication and work, but still, the keynote speakers.
Recording in progress.
The keynote speakers will be with us here today in this hall. I'd like you, dear audience, dear ladies and gentlemen, to be interactive, just like the online audience. So I will talk to both of you. We'll have time for a small question answer session. We really welcome all your questions in the chat. Please do ask us. My colleagues will help me to pick the most interesting questions to present it to our speakers. And I guess this is my introductory speech. It's almost over. I'd like to welcome you all. So, we do present the UN policy paper on population dynamics. That's what we'll do today. So, the UN system coordinator, Ms. Osnat Lobrani, unfortunately, she is staying beyond Ukraine today. She has already recorded a speech, so we will present you a video. Please, if we may get the video, thank you.
I'm delighted to welcome you today to the online presentation of the UN policy paper on population dynamics. This is an analytical document that all the UN agencies, funds and programs in Ukraine have prepared jointly, and the aim is to present our common position on population dynamics processes in Ukraine and formulate policy recommendations. I want to thank all of the representatives from state bodies, international organizations, civil society, and academia for joining us and giving us the opportunity to present and discuss this paper and its recommendations. And my hope is that this event will ignite more dialogue on a subject that is complex and very important for a topic for Ukraine. Why do we consider it so important to discuss this topic? Well, population dynamics are a key factor in determining the future of communities, countries, and ultimately of humankind. Changing population numbers and structures has a fundamental impact for both national development processes and the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. Population dynamics affect and they are impacted by human capital development, economic development, poverty and inequality, public health, education, social protection systems, labor market, pension systems, environment disasters, rights of youth and older persons, gender equality, deterioration of the environment, and more. It's really difficult to think of any socioeconomic activity that isn't affected by population dynamics. So we need to analyze and discuss and take into account population dynamics in planning of development policies at all levels, local, national, regional. Population dynamics is a reality that needs to be accepted and acted upon to ensure Ukraine's demographic resilience. The demographic situation in Ukraine is characterized by some negative trends in terms of the population health and well-being, opportunities for development and self-fulfillment, and that therefore calls for greater attention and investments. And this situation is aggravated by shortcomings of population statistics in Ukraine in the absence of a population census since December 2001. And here I want to stress that having a full-fledged population census is the most critical instrument and a long overdue necessity for Ukraine to explore in depth and understand population dynamics. Let me conclude by saying that although the aforementioned trends might sometimes raise some alarm or concern, the best response to the demographic change is to invest in human capital development, economic development that focuses on technological progress and innovations that increase productivity. Labor productivity, entrepreneurship, and innovation, ease of starting and doing business are much more important for economic development than just the size of the working population. It is important to support young people and young families which hold the future potential of the society. To remind you, the policy and population dynamics paper, as well as other policy papers previously developed by the UN, are all accessible for anyone interested on the UN official website in Ukraine. Thank you again for your attention, and I wish you a very interesting and fruitful discussion.
So thank you. Thank you, Ms. Osnat.
Because we have a big pleasure and honor that today UNFPA Regional Director, Ms. Alana Armitage, is with us again virtually online. Alana is not just a fantastic leader, our director with whom we really enjoy to work. She is an expert in population studies and demography herself. Moreover, our regional director is a co-author and a big promoter of the concept of demographic resilience, which will be a focus of our today's discussion. So it's even more pleasure to invite Alana to give us her welcoming remarks and fine-tune us on this demographic resilience concept. Thank you. Alana, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Pablo, for those very warm words. Good morning, Dobrego ranku, Mr. Alexander Jarema, Permanent Secretary of the Cabinet of Ministers, Professor Ella Livanova from the National Academy of Sciences, dear partners from the government of Ukraine, dear colleagues from the UN system, dear participants, and of course, my dear colleague Jaime Nadal, the UNFPA rep, and his stellar, fabulous team. I am really pleased to welcome you to say warm greetings from Istanbul on behalf of the United Nations Populations Fund Regional Office for Eastern Europe and Central Asia at this presentation event that we have co-organized with our good friends from the United Nations office in Ukraine. As today the United Nations rolls out its policy paper on population dynamics in Ukraine, I'd like to share with you our vision of a demographically resilient Ukraine, where people can enjoy human rights, thrive, and fully realize their potential. But why demographic resilience? Why does UNFPA use that term? Well, just like other countries of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, Ukraine is amidst a demographic transition. People have fewer children, postpone childbearing until older age, they live longer lives, they have more freedom to travel and seek their self-fulfillment abroad. As a result, Ukrainian society is getting smaller and growing older. These population dynamics affect every individual, every family, every couple, every community, and the nation as a whole. But UNFPA looks beyond value judgments. Is it good or is it bad? And we try to avoid simplifying the situation. The demographic resilience concept is based on the acceptance of the demographic reality. The change is here to stay. And while some of the demographic processes can be addressed by policies and individual choices, others will run on for years to come, and societies will need to change and adapt to them. So there's no good or bad. It's just a reality that we need to accept, comprehend, and take full account of. Demographic resilience is about the capacity to analyze, understand, and forecast population dynamics and their implications on socioeconomic development. It includes the knowledge, skills, tools, political will, and public support to address them so that the potentially negative effects of population change can be mitigated and the emerging opportunities are harnessed effectively, all for the prosperity of people, nations, and the planet. Demographic resilience is also an aspiration that policy responses to demographic change are based on factual evidence and human rights, and that they put people first in all development efforts, leaving no one behind. This concept shifts the population policy paradigm from short-sighted, quick fix approaches focused primarily on population numbers towards more comprehensive socio-demographic policies aimed at ensuring high quality of life, prosperity, and well-being for all. Demographic resilience is grounded on the principle that it's not population size that matters. What matters is the population's human capital, its knowledge and skills, health and education, productivity and capacity to innovate, together with life orientations, aspirations, motivations, and choices that people make. And as my friend and very well-renowned demographer, Dr. Wolfgang Lutz, likes to say, it's not the number of brains, it's what's in the brain that matters. Indeed, it's time that we stop worrying about the numbers only. Instead, we should understand and thoroughly plan what needs to be done to get our societies and economies well prepared for the impending demographic future. Let's stop calling the situation a demographic crisis. There are just social and economic crises with demographic consequences. Therefore, there's no quick fix and no single remedy to addressing low fertility and shrinking populations. It's also worth noting that building up demographic resilience may take different approaches depending on the specific context and most prominent population issues, like low fertility, population aging, massive migration, excess male mortality, or gender biased sex selection practices that we see in some parts of this region, or the large youth populations that we also see in parts of the region. In Eastern Europe, populations decline, yes, due to low fertility, but also very much due to high outward migration and high mortality. Demographically resilient societies recognize the complexity and scale of these trends and therefore understand that simplistic solutions just won't work, however attractive they may seem. Another highlight of the demographic resilience concept is that responses to demographic change need to be focused on people and human rights, which reinforces the principles of the 1994 International Conference on Population and Development held in Cairo and the program of action that was endorsed by 179 countries at that time. For instance, in both high and low fertility settings, demographically resilient societies do not strive to achieve an ideal or optimum fertility rate or population size, but they rather respect and support the fertility preferences and desires of individual women, men, families, and couples. Therefore, demographic resilience programs create and foster enabling conditions where young people, women, and men, including older persons, feel empowered to thrive and self fulfill. This also involves the inclusion of marginalized groups so that societies can benefit from their talents and their potential. Coming back to Ukraine, a country where the last population census took place 20 years ago, I would like to stress that having and ensuring access to complete, accurate, up to date, reliable, and disaggregated population data is arguably the main prerequisite for building demographic resilience. Without knowing and understanding the people we serve, their population features and trends, it is impossible to effectively address people's needs and aspirations, develop evidence based policies, and make socioeconomic development projections, plan investments, protect the environment, etc. And all in all, to uphold human rights and leave no one behind. Not to mention the fact that population data is required to produce, it's the denominator for 98 out of the 231 SDG indicators. So that just speaks to the importance of population data. Today, I am very happy on behalf of UNFPA to reaffirm our commitment to support the organization of the next population census in Ukraine and the transition towards censuses based on administrative data registers, which Ukraine is so aptly leading. We also encourage Ukraine to benefit from our demographic resilience program being implemented across Eastern Europe and Central Asia. And we are so pleased that the country is being very well represented at the upcoming ministerial conference on demographic resilience being organized by UNFPA and the government of Bulgaria that will take place in Sofia on the 1st and 2nd of December. Thank you all very, very much for your attention. It's a pleasure to be able to engage and to take part in this extremely interesting dialogue. I wish us all an interesting and inspiring presentation. Thank you very much. Back to you, Pablo.
Thank you, Alana. Thank you, Alana, very much. We are now definitely fine-tuned to the issue, and we can move together. Thank you also for reminding us about upcoming conference in Sofia. We will take a minute to provide more details and invite all to join again virtually to follow the conference just in a couple of weeks. But we have one more important speaker at this first part of our event. І зараз я перейду вже тепер на українську.
So I'm again switching to Ukrainian. So we have the State Secretary of the Cabinet of Ministers of Ukraine, Mr. Alexander Yarema. So I'd like Mr. Yarema to present his introductory speech. While he's coming, I'd like to say that Alexander he is a renowned expert on youth policy issues and civic society development. Alexander today has a very interesting role in this event, a very important integration and coordination function that he is actually responsible for in the ministry. The demographic processes which have there are no separate ministry. There is no separate ministry for the demographics, but it mostly covers all the areas of ministerial activity. It must be somehow integrated in its activity. We can say that demographics is one of the priorities set in all the reforms. So hundreds and thousands of decisions are taken by you in the cabinet. So how do you think, Mr. Yarema? How can we approach the implementation of the concept of this demographic resilience we heard about? How shall we move to, in the context of current demographic processes in Ukraine? Please, Alexander. Dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, well, Pavlo, you already mentioned everything. The only thing I have is just to welcome you and express my gratitude for this truly wonderful event, for this work. Because if you do take a closer look, when you say that there is that there isn't any single authorized like structure or unit, demographics, it's a cross-sectoral issue. It's a transversal one. It's in all the policies. It's present there. When we create a separate policy, you mentioned the youth policy, for example, when we start working on the strategy of youth policy, what we were analyzing, demographic indicators, the trends, and we understood how and what should be put as the foundation, especially when you take 2030 as the horizon and even beyond. It's really important that we have this huge scientific research work done. Truly, we had the complete interaction of NGOs, international partners, governmental agencies. And today, what is the task? Those ideas which are backing this policy paper, the recommendations to be truly put in practice. For a couple of times, we mentioned the issue of census, national census. I'm really happy that we finally have these decisions made. In 2022, we'll prepare. In 2023, we'll have the census, and the issues which were mentioned for us truly to make it fully evidence-based, not just to build hypotheses, but to have clear vision of what the situation is when it comes to demographics at national level, at regional level, at community level, and how should we formulate certain policies in the context of funding. It's really important. So I'm grateful to UNFPA. Truly, you are a very active and serious locomotive, a driver of very important processes. And I do want us all to have a very interesting and productive discussion. And of course, I want us all to implement those implement those recommendations cross-sectorally. How can we do it? Via different tools, interagency working group, I guess, headed by someone from the vice prime ministers, where we could have the representatives of all the ministries and NGOs to actually follow, to ensure the follow-up of this activity. It's a good chance for us not to miss any part of the policy and have this constant communication and dialogue, because sometimes it's really hard to make this first step. And when we build the platform, when we build the foundation, I think it's possible, and this will be a good tool for future work in that direction. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Yarema. Thank you for your recommendations. In European Union, there is a position, Vice President on demographics and democracy. Maybe in Ukraine, it's about time to have the same position presented in the governmental structure. Who knows? Okay, so we actually come to the presentation of recommendations in the concept in the policy paper presented by you. And I'd like to stress that these recommendations were prepared by the whole UN system, by all the experts of all UN agencies present in Ukraine. This is our joint baby, let's say. And because of that, as because the demographic processes, as we say, are transversal, so they are present, they are mentioned in the activities of all the agencies present in Ukraine, located in Ukraine, or those who launch certain projects or programs. Well, those who have offices and those who don't. So I'm honored to pass the floor to the representative of UNFPA, Mr. Jaime Nadal. So I I want you to present the recommendations of this policy paper.
You may sit here or stand, or how you prefer. Choices, free choices. Yes. Okay, Jaime.
Thank you very much, Pablo.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Pablo, and indeed a great pleasure to be here today and to have the opportunity to present this paper, which, as has been said before, is a UN paper on population dynamics. It's a brief analysis that we did in the UN system on what we see, the situation, the demographic situation of Ukraine, where we see that situation going, and what could be the possible policy options to deal with those changes that are in the making. I have to say that my presentation is going to be extremely brief. Most of what I was planning to say has already been said, and I'm sure that a great deal of what I'm going to say, Professor Livanova will be able to go further in detail and explain much better than me what it means and why it is important. So let me perhaps start with a brief synthesis of what are we talking about. We're talking about the combination of a number of social factors. As our regional director, Alain Armitage, mentioned, we are talking about a social and economic crisis. I would say probably a social and economic factors that have implications in terms of demographic variables, the demographic, components. What are those? Well, basically, we have a low and late fertility. We have a negative net migration, and we have, in the case this refers to Ukraine, we have early and high mortality. The combination of these three factors lead to basically loss in the absolute number of population. This creates the demographic situation that some people call population shrinking, some people call it depopulation. We do not necessarily like that terminology. It's something that is, it carries some connotations. There is a value judgment in the way that is being called. We prefer to just highlight the fact that because of that situation, there are fewer children, because there is lower fertility, because those who would be in a position to have children are to some extent migrating out of Ukraine. There are fewer youngsters that can not only have babies, but also engage in the labor market and increase the overall output of the Ukrainian economy, with due consideration to other factors, of course. And there are fewer adults, particularly male adults, because of the overmortality of males. The implications of these changes are, these dynamics are very substantial. And we can identify implications that have to do with the overall human capital in the country. The country, one could conclude that the country is losing capital because of this migration flow. We could also conclude that the dependency ratio will probably increase particularly not on the bottom of the pyramid, but actually on the top of the pyramid, because of the higher number of older persons relative to the other age groups. And there is a situation also with what we call the intergenerational replacement. Generations are smaller and smaller, and this has implications in terms of the social safety net. We made a very brief list of what could be the implications at societal as well as at an economic level. And some of those implications have also to do not just with the overall numbers, but actually with the distribution of population in the territory. For instance, we have, yes, indeed, localized depopulation processes, particularly in rural areas. This is happening. At the same time, we are seeing a change in the rural-urban equilibrium and an increase, a concentration of the population in urban areas. This is not necessarily bad. From a public policy point of view, the ability to provide better services in a more cost-efficient manner increases in urban settings as compared to rural areas. But of course, this needs to be factored in public policy making. The fact that there is this shift of population from rural areas to urban areas, and of course, we cannot forget that still rural areas require investments, and we're talking here about the paradigm of the SDGs and leaving no one behind. So, how to deal with the complexities of these shifts in terms of the geographical presence and representation of the population, leaving no one behind, and making sure that we can capitalize on the opportunities that having a larger urban population brings about for the development of the country. We have to be mindful at economic level, as I said before, of the potential loss in human capital. We have to also be mindful, and this refers to the issue of intergenerational replacement, the sustainability of the welfare state and social policies, particularly with respect to the contribution to the pension systems. We need to be mindful if we have a massive outmigration of human capital about the loss in productivity, and we have to factor in as well the implications of all that in the labor market dynamics. We try to capture here the situation that the country is going. Okay, this is the one that I wanted to project now. We talk about numbers, but we are actually talking about something else, or we should place the focus on something else. We should place the focus on people, on their choices, and on their resilience. And where are we at in terms of population change and all those choices and resilience? Well, we are actually transitioning from a situation that was dominated in the past by, and I don't know if this pointer works, a situation in the past that is characterized by what Professor Wolfgang Lutz names or considers high metabolic regime or high metabolic demographics, which is high mortality, high fertility, a very rural population, relatively high levels of young population, and low life expectancy. And this is a high metabolic regime because it requires that a lot of people are born in order to replace a lot of people that die, etc. So it's a high metabolic regime. And in that high metabolic regime, the choices are fairly limited. Life and death is not something that you choose. Well, you never choose death, no? But in a way, you can prolong your life making healthy choices across your life. This is something that you don't have that opportunity in the old demographic regime. And we are now transitioning to one that is the result of the success of development. That's why we are so reluctant to call it with negative adjectives. We don't want to call it a crisis. We don't want to call it a depopulation. No, no country will be depopulated. No country will be depopulated to zero. Countries will change. Countries will probably go back to the same situation that they had by year 2100, at the end of this period, to the situation 200 years ago or 200 years before, which is more or less the same number of people, but with a completely different outlook. It will be an older population. It will be a far more urban population. It will be a population with, of course, fewer children, but with a higher life expectancy. People should be able to live not only longer lives, but also healthier lives, and therefore be productive for a longer period of time. So this is the horizon. A horizon that will transition from a situation that is characterized or determined by this high demographic metabolism to one that is characterized by a low demographic metabolism. And we need to adapt to that. We need to adjust. Societies need to adjust to this change. And the process of adapting to this change is what we call demographic resilience. We need to build in resilience so countries, societies are able to adjust to this new reality that, again, we have to move away from the good or bad. This is a change that is here to stay. It's something that is coming. And so far, I have to say that we have no data that points to the fact that all these changes may be negative. When we cross-reference the population trend, the diminishing population trend in terms of numbers, and we cross-reference this trend with the trends that relate to Human Development Index and GDP, we see that in spite of the population, the overall number is decreasing, the economic output and the human development is on the rise. So having a smaller populations do not necessarily come with a crisis, do not necessarily come with a negative consequence. In spite of the prevailing mentality that a decrease in population size is inherently negative. Well, that's not necessarily the case. And this is what we want to put forward. What is negative is the fact that people may not have choices, may not have opportunities, and may see some of their rights rolled back for the sake of reverting or changing demographic trends. And this is something that we are very mindful because over the 20th century, we've seen a significant increase in terms of access to employment, civil, political rights. We've seen, for instance, the incorporation of women in the labor market. And we see that the prevailing discourse in some quarters these days is, well, maybe we should pay women to have children so they can stay home, stay away from the labor market, and contribute to resolving the demographic situation. That may neither resolve the demographic situation nor promote the further development of societies, because there is no value in that. And the facts and the data is very clear that in spite of some of those policies having been implemented in the past, and in some countries still being implemented, fertility is not going up. So we need to think differently. We need to do things differently because what we've been implementing in the past is not necessarily that effective. A few conclusions that we could share. This post-transitional change that was presented in the slide before last is a long-term trend and is here to stay. That we don't think that this is going to be reversed in the short term. This change is the result, for most of it, not for everything, but for most of it, is the result of improvement in living standards and the result of increased choices by individuals. Again, not in everything, but in most of the cases. One where is not necessarily the case is obviously migration. Migration is not driven by a free choice of individuals deciding to migrate. In some cases, it's forced because of the hardship of the conditions or because young people think they cannot realize their life project under the current circumstances, and therefore they go for greener pastures elsewhere. Again, that is something that needs to be factored in. Our proposal, or the UN position in Ukraine, is that rather than trying to reverse these demographic trends, which again, this is a very long-term trend that is here to stay, the policy should enable individuals to fulfill their productive and reproductive roles and ideals and expectations. Is what both Osnat Lubrani and Alana Armitage have mentioned, that we need people-centered policies. The moment individuals realize that the policies enable them to make those choices and to put them in practice, is that they will probably want to stay, they will probably want to have children, and that is absolutely independent from the fact that we may think that there is an ideal number of children in order to achieve some sort of demographic replacement. It's about individual choices. It's not about demographic replacement. We also believe that the sustained and gendered investments in human capital. We are particularly concerned, as I said before, about the demographic situation being utilized as an argument to roll back on particularly women's rights. And we've seen that happening in some quarters. You know? So we want to, we believe that it's important that countries pay due consideration to the fact that this situation requires that there is a more sustained and a structured investment in human capital, understanding, you know, or considering the three pillars of human capital: education, health, employability. That this investment is made with a gender perspective, and gender in the most relational sense of the word, meaning that the incorporation of women in the labor market is fundamental, but also dealing with the over-mortality of males is also important. And this has to be taken, you know, from the perspective of gender as well. Those investments need to be made through the life course, and they can or they should focus on increasing productivity. As it's been said before, I'm not saying anything new. It's not the number of brains, it's what it's in the brain. And we need bright brains, not necessarily many, many brains. The productivity, the output, the capacity of a society and an economy to thrive, particularly these days, do not depend on numbers, depend on what is in the brains. No? Two last points, 5 and 6. Population-related policies, including or particularly immigration policies, need to address issues that go far beyond what we were saying before of fertility, mortality, etc. They need to address political, social, and security-related push and pull factors, which is, again, when I said before, the situation is the result of gains in freedom and people making choices, while perhaps migration, in the case of migration, is not so clear. And the last point, everyone has mentioned this point before, so I'm not going to be an exception. Data. We need data. And we very much welcome the prospects of Ukraine conducting the census in 2023 and subsequently, I mean, having a good series of data in terms of population. I mean, it's going to be very difficult to deal with any of these population issues without having proper and up-to-date population data. So let me take this opportunity to congratulate the government of Ukraine for the determination and the commitment to implement the census in 2023. And with that, I think I'm going to conclude my brief free adaptation of what is the UN population dynamics position paper. Again, it's a free adaptation of what is in the paper. I would invite you all to look at the paper, to familiarize yourself with it, and of course, to raise any questions that you may have. I mean, this paper is meant to be a piece that is supposed to generate debate, to generate dialogue, to put the issue of demographic dynamics to the possible extent on the table as an important issue that requires and deserves due attention. Thank you very much. Дуже дякую.
Thank you, Jaime. Дякую дуже, Jaime.
Thank you, Jaime. Thank you, Jaime, for this truly comprehensive presentation. And this will stimulate discussion and questions in future as well. So truly, analytical note, or the policy papers we call it, it will be accessible fully at the UN website. And I think you... And by the way, we have the contact data on the screen. It's really easy to find. Just to familiarize with the actual text of the publication. And we move further. So I can say that while we were working on this policy paper this year, we simultaneously also launched certain activities activities launched jointly with Ms. Libanova, our joint work on, let's say, more detailed report, the idea, the vision, and how can we evaluate demographic resilience uh, based on the available data. Where do we have gaps and which we need to cover? What practical solutions we may offer in the context of Ukraine, in the national context, just to ensure what we have seen in the Heimer speech. What are the ways to adapt? What can we do to adjust in the long term perspective? And of course, even start doing it now in the midterm and short term perspective as well. Because, truly, we need to have a strategy. These are the long term processes, but still, the reality that we have today, it's really hard to generate any reliable midterm vision or strategy, let's say, because reality is a fast changing thing. In the crisis context, we never get rid of that crisis context, actually. We always live in that. And many things may influence our life tomorrow, like the energy crisis, security related issues, and well, we live on the minefield. And with this background, how can we raise an issue of demographic resilience living on a minefield? But still, we continue doing that because we have a leader, we have a committed person, a dedicated person who herself is an expert, and she is the bearer of the utmost expertise on demographic processes. She knows all the peculiarities, global and national. So I can't imagine this event without this lady, without Ella Libanova, head of the Institute of Demographics and Social Research. And I want her to present certain elements of that joint work, just to present your vision on demographics, on the strategies which should somehow accelerate these processes. Ella, you're highly welcome. So actually, I want to concentrate on demographic components of the human capital of Ukraine. Because when we do talk about demographic resilience, and by the way, I love the Ukrainian word, another Ukrainian word that we use, not stikist, but vidnovlюваність. I can't say how it can be translated into English better, but we have one English word for that resilience. We just have two words in Ukrainian. Well, that powerful human capital, it's impossible to ensure that. Actually, human capital today is the key component of the progress, development, and the human capital ensures 70% of the national wealth in developed countries. Human capital is a very simple thing. It's a combination of knowledge, skills, and let's say health of the population of the country. And this should be the target for investment. You need to invest funds to have the lifetime investment and the sources of investment. We speak about the humans themselves, their families, and also the communities, employers, and state. The question when we differentiate various countries, it depends on the volume of investment. Who invests what amount? Of course, we invest how? Via improving the quality of life, high quality food, healthcare support, high quality healthcare support, and timely support. So, healthy lifestyle promotion, high quality education, professional skills development. And I would stress today the following: Ukraine has to shift from the concentration of educational and skill-based qualifications at early employment years to the lifelong learning. So we speak about safe jobs, safe and productive jobs. But this all is very important. All this investment is really important. But if we don't have people, if we have nobody to invest, you can get rid of that. You can forget about it. That's why, in my opinion, our demographic component, I mean the human potential and the policy of national security, this is underestimated. Unfortunately, Mr. Yarema already left, but I hope he will get this phrase from me or from you. Because, in the 21st century, we all talk about the economy of knowledge. So we have a shift from the traditional economic system to the economy of knowledge and expertise. I'd like to draw your attention here that how we create this economy of knowledge, we replace the physical, financial, resource capital, we replace it with human capital. And this is the basic difference of the 21st century and economy of the 20th century. This is the key difference. Today, the physical potential is not of that significant importance comparing to 19th, 20th century, but human intelligence defines how the economy will evolve. Economy of knowledge. We either have it or not. So the World Bank designs the indices of human capital. So Ukraine takes, in my opinion, quite a proper place. 0.63 between 50 and 56th position out of 174 countries. It means the index is 0.63. It tells that the productivity of a child which was born in 2020, it's the index for 2020, is 27% lower, will be 27% lower than the level which could have been achieved. We speak about the health condition of the child, education of the child, and 27% of this gap. So we have 100% as something we could have achieved with a better policy, but the child will have a 27% lower potential being born in 2020. In Ukraine today, we talk about the threat of human capital deficit. Actually, what we didn't have any single movement when it comes in the context of index. It must be a concern for us and for the government. The threat of human capital deficit, these come from one source. So in the context of this innovative technological support, our economy still can't keep the pace, and we have the gaps in social economic policy. I will not give all of them to you. You know what that is. On the other hand, we have purely demographic factors like population aging, depopulation, so early mortality. We speak about full abled persons and outflow of people. We have these two sides, two drivers, two locomotives that actually generate this human capital deficit. Nobody knows what to do with that, and nobody wants to listen about that and to think about that even. So, just a couple of illustrative slides. I don't know if you need to stop at it. So, we just speak of the following. You remember in the beginning of 1993, how many people we had? 52 million. 20% of decrease, population decrease. So we can actually mention the 2014, but comparing to 2015, 8% we have of cut, but of decrease. But again, if the State Statistics Service is giving the proper data, without census, we can play with this percentage every time we need to mention it. We often mention the following: that we have the demographic increase of 65 plus category. Yes, starting from 2015, this movement was restored, and we still have the aging trend very active. In 2021, we have 17% of such population, again, if the State Statistical Service gives the proper data. when in EU countries we have an average 19% of 65 plus. It's like a bad thing, but not a critical thing. What is a bad thing? Okay, how can we say that getting a lot of elderly people is a bad thing? We all were improving the life expectancy. That's what we wanted to get eventually. So when we speak about depopulation, yes, we have it in Ukraine. We have the figures. I will not read it now, all of them. Depopulation in Ukraine is very fast, much faster comparing to other countries. But if we do take, for example, Latvia or Lithuania, not more, approximately the same. If we take 2019, I just didn't see the data on 2020. If you take the 2019, well, Italy, slower depopulation than Ukraine, but Bulgaria the same. So we can say that depopulation, the process is inevitable. With this, in this context of development, depopulation is not related to economic crisis and turbulence. Depopulation is a trend. It's natural, something we have to adapt to, and we have to just take it into consideration in our activity. You can't fight it. You can't fight biology. You can't become younger. So this is just a very beautiful graph. That's why I took it. That's why I have it. So you can see it beautifully how the fertility rate was decreasing. You can see it properly. What we have within the last years, this thing that we have. Honestly, I do suspect that we have a little bit higher fertility rate than we have it calculated by the State Statistics Service. I have some doubt concerning that figure, but it is as it is. Okay, the next slide, please. So, truly, we have some very important stuff here. We don't have just the lower fertility rate, we have a very useful stuff for the human capital, a very useful process. We have the maternity aging. Starting from 2016, you can see where we have the lower fertility rate. Mostly those who are 2024, women of 2024. Very low fertility rate for women by 20 years. Thank God, and thank God, that's good. Starting from 2016, the fertility rate at 25-29 is exceeding the level of 2025 group. If in 2016 the difference was 2%, in 2020 the difference between these two groups is 15%. It's a serious gap, it's a serious difference. What does it tell us about? It's a normal, purely normal process for the human capital development. First, you need to socialize, then you give birth to a baby. Parents invest in themselves, in their education, in their development, personal development, and in their children, because if they are older, when they are older, they have more opportunities, more knowledge, and more skills on how to nurture their children, how to bring up their children. So when we say that we need to convince young children to promote the concept two children in a family, well, yes, we need, but please always take into consideration that we need to have this responsible parenting concept. Parents must have jobs first, equal opportunities and rights for both parents when it comes to childcare, delegating the duties in the family and distributing duties. And if parents are divorced, they must have equal opportunities. In Ukraine, divorce means that father has no contact with the child. And I don't think that this is a normal process. This is what we have to fight with all the community, with all the society. And we need to change these concepts. We need to change the perception of the judiciary as well, because they make the final decision. Now, the next one. The biggest loss of human capital and lack of progress on index of human capital, I think it's related to low male mortality rate, to high male mortality rate. It hasn't changed within the last 60 years, and also excess loss in the age category of from 20 to 64. Out of each thousand, we have 149 people more dying comparing to Poland. These are for males and 49 females more. We can see where Ukraine is. Who has the worst situation if you take Europe? Only in Russia, in separate age groups for Moldova and Kazakhstan. If someone will be satisfied with that, then it's a catastrophic comparison with Switzerland, a little bit better for Poland, but anyway, I just want to remind you that in 1990s, the average life expectancy was the same with Poland. We, of course, we had low we had lower mortality rate for younger groups, and they had lower mortality rate for older groups, but it was almost the same. Today we have the differences. Average expected life expectancy in EU countries more than 80 years, in Ukraine only 73. What we have now. Another thing, if we do tell about progress, well, like taking 1960. 1960, we were one of the leaders. Comparing to 1960s, the average life expectancy at male birth went up by 19.8%, females 20.5%. Ukraine only 1.3 and 5.9. Huge difference, huge difference. It means that we don't have progress. We can't keep with the pace. And this gap will even extend. It will become critical. So, 1897. Starting from 1897, we can see that there is no progress, unfortunately. Is it the government's fault? I'm sure of that. It's not. We need to consider, of course, COVID-19 pandemic. I am radically against evaluating the impact of COVID-19, taking the number of deaths from COVID-19. So we can't take it. Just the excess mortality. That's what we should use. If a human being, okay, if the person is sick, has certain cardiovascular diseases, if this person does not get any timely medical treatment because of COVID and this person dies, I'm a demographic expert. I have doubts. What was the cause? Cardiovascular disease or COVID? Because there was no medical treatment, timely medical treatment. Why it happens, it's another question. If you do take a closer look, in 2020, starting from September, the situation was deteriorating, worsening heavily. In 2021, I would say up to June. Then July and August, it's somehow balanced. Does it mean that the situation does the situation mean that we are coming out of the plateau? I don't know. But truly, this situation with COVID is like that, the current one. If previously I was screaming and shouting, that we have very bad forecast because of the low vaccination rate, today it's like we are moving where we need to move, at least when it comes to vaccination. So, government is doing what it has to do. Please, the next slide. Okay, what is contradictory when we speak about human capital migration process? It gives a very contradictory impact. First of all, I'd like to say the international exchange, demographic exchange, is an essential part of globalized society, the globalized world, and it's a trigger, a driver, one of the key channels to develop the civilization. So, if with all, I would not advise you to fight other stuff. Maybe just accept it as it is. In this case, it's clear we can fight this migration outflow. We can't do it, and I'm very concerned because I hear these ideas from governmental agencies that will bring the migrants back. We will not. We will try to counteract migration flow. No, this is very obsolete and out of date approach. So it's very bad that the majority of active and ambitious Ukrainians do consider external migration as a way to improve their lives. If they can't go abroad, they move to big urban hubs. It's a good like social. It plays the role of social elevator. We don't have reliable data, so we have different evaluations for the external migration scope. Probably we have like 3.5 million Ukrainians studying and working abroad. By 2014, the key concentration center, let's say, was the Russian Federation, half of the migrants. Today, of course, we have Poland as the leader, the host country for our migrants. And when we do talk about evaluations, truly, when we talk about evaluation of the migration process impact on human capital and demographic resilience, we have to consider it like returning or non-returning within this perspective. So returning gives much more disadvantages. The only plus is that the non-returning mostly, the only advantage mostly is that labor market gets better, becomes more activated. But returning has advantages and disadvantages. Two-thirds of potential labor migrants say that they will go back to Ukraine potentially. Those who only intend to. More than 40% say we will, of course, under any circumstances, will return, even if they offer lifelong contracts. I have doubts on these statistics. I'm not convinced that people are sincere, I mean the respondents. I don't have anything to say to sociologists, but the respondents, they are quite often we say what we think is socially acceptable, what people want to hear, but we don't present what we really think of. You know, we really want to be convenient for everyone. So, how the large scale migration affects us, and of course, the investment that they provide. No rating is here, it's just a random list. So, thanks to migrants, we definitely changed the external image of the country. And a lot depends on that. What people think of us, how our migrants behave abroad. If our migrants behave behave as civilized Europeans, that's one thing, a better option. But if they do behave improperly, I'd say it's a very different option. It's a different thing. And we relate the country's loan rating and investment flow. Nobody is going to go into a country when people and institutions have doubt, are we adequate? Is our government adequate? If you do have this doubt, you will never invest. Second thing, returning the migrants, even if we speak about the short term return, it is reflected in their behavior, at least the closest environment. I speak about democratic principles, I mean, and communication with governing agencies and investment. People who go abroad, they maybe have more money, but they invest more often in small business. Let it be small business, but they invest in education more than others. So we speak about the accelerated development of financial and banking system. I don't remember the figures, but trust me, among the families where we have long-term migrants, the percentage of those with bank cards is 3 times higher than in the families where we have no migrants, and approximately 1.5 times higher comparing to those with short-term migration. A banking card and any kind of transaction with a card, it's very important element for human capital development and proper functioning of the state. Of course, the money that we get from abroad, remittances, this is really an important amount. And it affects the impoverishment, minimizes the impoverishment, because we instantly provide them to those who need it. And it promotes the minimization of territorial differences. So people go abroad from poorer regions, officially poorer, I can say. Of course, it promotes the buying capacity, and therefore inflation goes up. Unfortunately, like it's a rule of life. But in my opinion, I would say that zero inflation has to be only on the cemetery. I'm sorry, but in economy we need to have a positive one. Sorry first for saying that. But when what else do we have? Purely negative. In many cases, the recipients which do get support from their labor migrants, from their relatives, they minimize their economic activity and they turn into couch potatoes. I'm sorry for saying that. They expect to get some support from abroad more often, and not often they are ready to make some money on their own. A separate problem, children of the migrants. I'm not saying about the social structure, but those children quite often don't have proper like guidance for employment in Ukraine. Social orphans, as we call it, and abandoned elderly relatives, and we lose. Even if you have 3 or 3.5 million people, not more. If these people are bored, it means that human capital of these people works for other countries. It's lost for Ukraine in long-term perspective. We need to openly talk about it. A little bit about the remittances, the transfers. You can see how actually these individual transfers evolved. 12 billion in 2020. This is significant. It's almost 5 times more than direct foreign investment flow. I understand that not all the migrants' money are spent on human capital and business, but believe me, for Ukraine, each hryvnia spent within Ukraine works for Ukraine. That's as simple as can be. For me, it's important where you spend the money. It doesn't matter where you actually earn it, in what part of the world. Okay, lockdown and COVID-19, just a couple of words to understand what evidence we have on impact of COVID on migration. A lot of conversations we had will have 5 million coming back in the hardest period, 2020, when you remember that the president said we will not let people go, even for our people will close the borders. With the softest evaluation, we had only 500,000 migrants, mostly from Poland. People returned, mostly those who didn't have long-term contracts and legal contracts. Those who were afraid to stay without anything. And even then, when these people were asked, they again wanted to, after COVID, they wanted to go abroad. In 2021, according to National Bank, 10 million $10 million were transferred to Ukraine. It exceeds the 2020 indicators by 19.7%. So, COVID, of course, is a tragedy, but our people do work abroad and they send money to Ukraine still. And I do hope that we invested in the human capital of those staying in the country. Next one. So, in my opinion, what should be the task for the modern social policy? So, we need to establish conditions for prosperity, individual prosperity for their development, growing the human capital and its optimal use, effective use, and we need to increase the capacity of the population to counter various threats like COVID or Russian war with Russia. And I think that Ukrainian population today demonstrates its resilience. Let's use the word resilience, but we still exist. You know, people. Basically, nothing catastrophic has happened comparing to like if we take the last 7 years. So what we have to do clearly identify the existing capacity and potential capacity to be identified, which we may get thanks to effective and balanced and determined state policy. We need to analyze the risks together with evaluation of chances. We need to break the negative trends, but I have a doubt that we will do it. If we speak about the negative trends, I would like us to draw some red lines not to be crossed. And I just want to say what actually gives me pleasure that today the National Defense and Security Council, they do take care of the index of national security. They pay a lot of attention to the demographic factors. Thank God we've reached this step. I don't know what result we'll have, maybe zero result, but at least these indicators are designed and we'll use it. I don't know how, but we will. The only thing I want to mention, the key idea is to allow people to individually select the way they the way they will behave, and to identify their choices. But still, society must somehow impact that choice anyway. For people to pick the behavior which actually meets the needs of the society. Vaccination. We mentioned that you need to vaccinate. We had one thing. When we had this order on restrictions, the dynamics of vaccination changed. But it's not for Ukraine. It doesn't just work for Ukraine. We all are really happy for Scandinavian countries where parents can take the parental leave, where we have the gender equality, but it became real after parents were obliged to be responsible for them both to be responsible for their children. I think that the task for our community that we have here today, in particular, to support government to understand how can we affect it. Thank you. Thank you, Ella. Thank you so much. And so many answers to questions. Demystification. We are doing the myth busting stuff. We are myth busting the demographic myths. So, human development, we speak about, let's say, restorative human development. Restorative. Not maybe the resilience, but restoration. So, again, what we speak about. The individual choice with social impact, let's say. Individual choice guided by social impact, but we speak about census. We speak about census. Isn't it about figures? It's just purely quantitative. Where's the logic? Let's find logic. We talk about a specific human being, but we want to know how many of us. I think that we need another expert to understand what is the census, why we need it, and what answers will it give to us. The census, the next speaker, Miss Maria Timonina, the director of the Department on Statistics on Demographic Statistics from the State Service of Statistics of Ukraine. Please. So, good afternoon, dear colleagues, dear partners. A huge gratitude for invitation to this event. So we prepare to the national census. Today's State Statistical Service is in active phase of preparation, and Ukraine, for so many times, the Ukrainian government has stressed that we will take part in the global census round 2020 with using the methodological principles used in EU countries. according to recommendations of the Eurostat, UN, and the Conference of European Statisticians. Ukrainian government, with its decision, defined the year of the census to be carried out 2023, that is. And for us to ensure the implementation of this decision, our service has already taken certain preparatory steps. In December 2019, to test the method of census, the program, and the census documents, the key organizational measures, and the technology of the data processing in the census, we had a demo census launched with the use of innovative technologies on data collection about the population. During this demo census, as we call it, the test census, respondents could independently fill out the questionnaire on a special portal in internet, and the staff used tablets to directly interview people from the door to the door, and the results of the census proved that use of tablets itself is an effective solution. So electronic questionnaires filling was carried out. It actually saved us a lot of time, 3 times faster comparing to paper version. So the data we collected, was no need to additionally put it on the database. And during the filling out procedure, these were controlled and monitored instantly. Thanks to that, we actually managed to minimize the period of processing and aggregation of data. During the test census, we also tested the technological process, automated system for data processing and collection, and the service, the statistical service, is on the right way, I can say. And we are moving closer and approaching the 2023. We are ready for it. Within this period, we drafted and approved the technical documents to create software, special software for test and national census. Such important documents as the concept and technology of data processing. A lot of work was done to draft and approve the program of census. We adopted it. We got the approval of the Human Rights Commissioner, and then the draft program was approved at the joint meeting of the National Academy of Sciences of Ukraine and the State Statistical Service Collegium, together with the academicians from the National Academy of Ukraine and the staff of the service. We presented various ethnic and language groups to use it during the census. Drafted the list of these groups. So we drafted the software sets to process the data of the census. Due to the decentralization reforms and presentation of the codifier, of the new codifier for communities, today we still are improving the software components. And we update the maps, of course, electronic maps, which we managed to design for the census needs. Today, we have an interagency commission functioning on promoting the census, headed by the Vice Prime Minister of Ukraine, the Minister of Digital Transformation, Mikhailo Fedorov. The commission, respectively, is tasked to promote the coordination of actions of the central executive power bodies, local full governance bodies, all the agencies and organizations which are involved to the census procedure. And today we have 5 meetings held already at the commission. We do discuss very important issues crucial for effective preparation to the census. That's what we discuss mostly. So the State Statistical Service also drafted. Also, we did a very important job. We drafted the law on presenting amendments to selected laws of Ukraine on statistical activity. Amendments to the law of Ukraine on national census, in particular, to actually present an opportunity to obtain data about population with more innovative means. So we speak about online questionnaires from respondents, filled out by respondents, and the use of information from the administrative registries as well. Also, this draft law that I mentioned stipulates the census to be launched each 10 years. The draft law was approved and considered by the Cabinet of Ministers, and right now it's considered by committees of Verkhovna Rada. The statistical service still continues processing. Sorry, not the processing, but still continues updating the legislation for census. And we've drafted 2 decrees of the Cabinet of Ministers on reimbursement, labor reimbursement for the census staff, and also on organization of the procedure to establish the date of the census, deadlines. We established the key tasks in this document and key executives to perform the necessary duties. Also, we draft and prepare a program for National Census 2023, the list of questions. In the program, more than 50 questions, by the way, we have. We harmonize it with the requirements of national legislation. So more than 60 representatives, the ministries, the academic institutions, NGOs took part in this program. So the final version of the program for the Census 2023 will be approved with the Human Rights Commissioner. We plan to consider and approve at the joint meeting of the Presidium of the National Academy of Sciences and the Service Collegium, and then this order on approving the program of census will be also validated by the Ministry of Justice. Due to its scope, the census requires a special approach at all stages, starting from the preparation stage. An essential requirement for the census to be carried out properly is to stick to the deadlines. The funding primarily, because we work at the state budget expense. So, with the preliminary calculations for us to complete the procedure of the census, we speak about all the stages, including the distribution of the results. For the period of 2022-2024, we need more than 5 billion hryvnias in total for the procedure. Relevant calculations already are prepared by the service, and we presented it as a proposal to the state budget, to the Ministry of Finance to process this proposal. I just want to note that out of these expenses, 70%, this will be the labor reimbursement for the temporary staff and other people involved to perform the relevant duties. One of the most important peculiarities of the census, which makes it absolutely different from all other statistical observations, is the huge amount of temporary staff, people who are not employed at governmental agencies, who are not state officials, and who are involved for a specific period of time. And their key task is to obtain the data and transfer the data to statistical units. So, according to preliminary calculations for the census in 2023, we plan to involve more than 80,000 people as a staff. But the final amount will be identified after we will draft our quarterly list. This is the key preparatory task for us. The quarterly lists, the quarterly lists of towns, villages, and cities, of the residential premises, and so on. In Ukraine, we already launched the activity on preparing to the census. So we speak about 2030, we'll pick the registry or combined method for it. UNFPA and State Statistical Service already had an online forum held, the registry-based census in Ukraine, and as a result of this event, what we did, we signed a joint document. So this document was signed by Mr. Nadal, Igor Werner, head of the Statistical Service, signed it as well, and Oleg Nemchinov from the Cabinet of Ministers signed it as well, to establish a working group on designing a roadmap for Ukraine to use the registry-based census. We already have 5 meetings of this working group. So we actually presented at the meetings the goals of the roadmap, the structure, and we discussed the issues on legislative aspects of the census, registry-based census, also technical aspects were discussed. And we expect that the draft roadmap will be presented for consideration of the government by the end of this year. Just upon the occasion, we'd like again to express our gratitude to UNFPA Ukraine, our reliable partner, for their support and their help provided to us at this preparatory stage for us to effectively carry out the census in 2023. Thank you. Truly thank you. Thank you so much. We can see how huge this work will be in 2023, and even preparing to it is quite difficult stuff. We do hope that you will effectively complete the task, and the key thing is that the data obtained after the census will be used at all levels, and the users in particular, the governmental agencies, the ministries as well, and of course the managers, the mayors, the heads of the local governance bodies, they will know how to use the data to actually support the investment in human capital, how to finally reach this demographic resilience, how to get the proper quality of the process, and therefore respond to demographic processes, which the ongoing demographic processes we have in the country today, and global processes, of course. We don't have so much time for discussion. I'll just ask a couple of, let's say, blitz questions. By the way, one of the questions we got in the chat. Hi, ma'am.
So we know the problem. We see the possible solution of investing in human capital, addressing the demographic resilience. First, what UN can already offer as a solutions? What we can do in order to promote this, show practical results? And the question from the audience, from the audience: are there any countries similar to Ukraine or different from Ukraine where already these issues are practically being addressed? There are who are already doing something in terms of addressing the demographic resilience.
Thank you, Pablo. I think that the two questions are very much interconnected in a sense, because, what the UN can do? Well, we basically, we try to make a positive contribution to putting the issue on the map. And when we were analyzing the situation of Ukraine and other countries, we first realized that, well, there was a need for the census. And we've been advocating very strongly for that. And so we can advocate, we can provide technical assistance, we can act as a broker and a convener, bring in different countries, different research institutions that may have expertise in the area that may eventually provide good quality advice to countries that are willing or ready to embark in trying to address this challenge or any other challenges. I mean, this is the role of the UN. In terms of demographic resilience, I would say that demographic resilience, it's a concept that is in the making, but it's a concept that has a number of elements on which we see a number of countries that have made significant progress. For instance, the Nordic countries, the Scandinavian countries, in whatever has to do with fertility, the implementation of policies that promote the conciliation between the productive and reproductive roles of both women and men, promoting equality at the level of the household, within the families, so women know that if they eventually decide to have a child, they will have support from the state, they will have support from the employer, could be a private sector company, but they will also have support from their partner in terms of ensuring that, well, they take also that responsibility on board. I don't think that because of the choices that we were referring to, women have the choice of whether having or not having children. And obviously, many of them are choosing either not to have them or to postpone their decisions until the conditions are met. But for many of them, the conditions are never met. And we have to be very clear about that because having a child, as Professor Livanova said, is a serious matter and it requires that first they finish their studies, they join the labor market, and they have the conditions to have it. So if we don't create those conditions, then it's going to be very difficult to get fertility, the current trends reversed. The objective should not be to reverse the trend. The objective should be to give that woman the possibility of fulfilling their potential in life. And that, if we can achieve that, then we probably won't have to worry about fertility rates because fertility will go up. And chances are that if men are more involved in terms of family responsibilities, and we have some very beautiful projects in Ukraine about tato hubs and involving men, etc. Chances are that if men take on board that responsibility, men will want to live healthier lives, and men will probably be more engaged in terms of, let me put it that way for lack of a better word, socially responsible behavior. So there are other countries and there are experiences that can be shared, that can be, can be shared in Ukraine. And if there is political will to consider those as potential policy options, and this is, by the way, what we are going to do in Sofia in this high-level ministerial demographic resilience conference, is to bring together countries from the region, countries from other regions. We're going to have South Korea, we're going to have Japan, we're going to have a number of Latin American countries coming to Western European countries, Eastern European countries, and Central Asian countries, coming together to discuss about these issues, policymakers sharing what their concerns are, what has worked in their countries, what has not worked, and what could be adopted as good practices. And following that, the idea is to establish a community of practice made of primarily policymakers, but also involving academia and civil society, that for a period that we see as a horizon, we see as the horizon 2030, which is the horizon of the SDGs, this community of practice will be working on new innovative policy approaches to tackling these issues. Because what was done in the past is what brought us here, and obviously it didn't work. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime.
And right now, I do have a question to you. UN formulated the demographic recommendations for all of us, for the government, for the society. It's not a secret that UN agencies today And we, as the UNFPA, we design our program for the next 5 years, let's say. It will be launched in 2023. And we are still in the planning and analysis period. So, in your opinion, UN system, how can it help Ukraine to uh, draw more attention to demographic processes? How to put the human development issue in the center? And together with demographic resilience, of course, why would you see our role and contribution? First question to you. Okay, let's one by one. Let's have it one by one, okay? We have two aspects. First aspect, distribution of good practices, of course. Practices and UN system always knows about it earlier comparing to our partners. You always are the early bird. When it comes to practices, best practices, we need to distribute it, not just telling that in this country they did la la la. No. Um, Clearly characterize what the task, what the goal was, has been set, what we managed to achieve, what we didn't manage, and why. Because the process of implementation is will be more interesting for us in context of risks now to mitigate risks. The second area, I do hope that in 2023 we'll have the census completed and we'll have a huge database. And you may support us in the use of the database. Maybe it does make sense today to provide recommendations to the State Statistical Service. Which indicators should be taken on the board primarily? Because they will take the same approach: age, distribution, and then. You can see what are the advantages of the digitalization of census in this case. Secondly, how can we use the data, in which sequence these should be aggregated? Okay. And the second question to you, Ms. Libanova, it was about the census. Okay. So I do think that we had a chance to get this opinion. Like, there is no demand for data. I even know who generated this idea. I know the mouth which spoke that. So how to create the demand, how to make mayors interested on their analysts, how to make ministries interested in the active use of demographic data, in particular the data, just with examples. We just need to show it like to children. If you want to do this, you have to rely on this and this, and only the census will give the information, nothing else, and nothing else will be there. When I had a conversation with the person that you mentioned, the one who should not be named, I just said, okay, I was given the following sentence. I asked all the ministers, they all said they don't need the census. And the only thing I said, you put the wrong question or you have the wrong ministers, I'm sorry. Okay. Oh, well, thank you so much. Truly, truly thank you. We'll hope that census will take place and the demand for the data will be a mad one. If there are no questions, ladies and gentlemen, I think that we will draw a big, thick line under this event. So, again, I just want to express my huge gratitude to our wonderful speakers today. I really want to express gratitude to our colleagues from all the agencies, UN agencies, involved in drafting of this policy paper, colleagues from resident coordinator offices who helped us with the organization of this event. In particular, Ms. Katerina. I just want to express gratitude to our expert, UNFPA expert, Mr. Oleg Voronenko, who was directly involved to drafting of this policy paper and all the documents. We are also grateful to the Provocator Club for their hospitality today. And of course, we would like to express gratitude to all of you, the ladies and gentlemen, all of you, the actual audience and the online audience. We do hope that this discussion will generate more attention to demographic processes and the solutions which we may use to adapt to the trends that we observe. And we will be really pleased to stay in touch with you to provide answers to your questions and comments. And a lot of questions, a lot of information, of course. All the colleagues who are interested, you may get the information if you do involve to if you take part in the Sophia conference, which is about to take place on December 1st and 2nd. You may even register online and use the online platform to participate. There's a wonderful chance. Thank you so much. Stay safe and have a nice day. We have some coffee, as far as I understand, and tea, so please enjoy.
Recording